All right, so we're at about 5 after the hour, and I think it's a great time to get started with this session. Once again, thanks to everybody who's with us this afternoon. We're excited to get the show on the road and really excited to see such a full house with us here today. We appreciate that you're all taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for the conversation. We know everyone has a lot on their plates at the moment. And we do really hope that everybody in the audience today, you're doing all right, you're healthy, your families and your campus communities are doing well as well. My name is Rebecca Smetana. I'm the Director of Partner Relations for the Global Learning Collective, and I'm going to help to moderate the session today. I do want to start by saying just a few words about the Global Learning Collective for those of you who aren't familiar. The collective is a consortium of 5 specialized partner organizations that are each located in different regions of the globe. You can see our member logos here. So in our consortium, we have the Asia Institute, we have Athena Study Abroad, Campus B, located in South America, SEPA, based in Europe, and EDU Africa. And as a whole, our consortium supports a full portfolio of customized and open enrollment programs. And our members operate independently, but come together to promote a shared set of values and offer links to trusted partners in other geographic regions. And we also collaborate on joint projects and initiatives like this webinar. And so if you're here, it's probably because you have a relationship with one or maybe more of our collective members, and we really appreciate our partners in the audience today. Thank you for being here. I personally hope to have the chance to meet many of you soon once we are able to start gathering together again, and hopefully that is sooner rather than later. So let's go ahead and jump into the session. The theme of our session today is the future of student mobility. And it is in some ways a follow-up to an earlier session that was facilitated by Brad Fueling, who's one of our panelists today, and his team at the Asia Institute. Back in April, they hosted a session about the front lines of education abroad and lessons learned from the global pandemic. And Brad and his team had panelists speak about their own experiences navigating the crisis. And maybe some of you in the room were able to participate in that session. If you weren't, I happen to know that it was recorded, so I'm sure Brad or myself would be happy to share the link with you after our session today. But for our conversation today, you know, as many of us have made it through some of the most tumultuous periods of the crisis, you all had to work really quickly to bring students home and navigate through all the immediate program cancellations and the impacts to students and to operations. We're at a point where we're turning our attention to fall and beyond, setting decision-making deadlines for semesters ahead. We're looking at pivoting program models to virtual or hybrid. We're making contingency plans for all of the different scenarios that may or may not play out in the coming months. And really, the only thing that we know for certain is that everything is uncertain, right? And so we're trying to make all of these decisions while a lot of us are separated in our own homes, being socially distant from one another. And many of us also, unfortunately, have less manpower than we had before. So with all of that in our minds, we decided to host this session to bring the community together for a conversation so that we can share experiences and ideas. We want to discuss the vision for education abroad moving forward in the months ahead, keeping student needs as the central focus for how we adapt and possibly even re-envision the opportunities and experiences that we offer. And I'm really excited to have 4 experienced international educators on the panel today. Let's move and you can see the panelists. So what we really have is 4 very different organizations and institutions represented. So we have a public school, we have a private school, a US-based partner organization, and a partner organization whose central operations are located abroad, in this case, China. So our panelists, we have Stacey McKay Benander, who is the founder and president of Athena Study Abroad, David Komp, the assistant provost for global education at Columbia College Chicago, Bradley Fueling, chairman and CEO of the Asia Institute, and Jenna Graff, director of the Office of International Education at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. Before I turn it over to the panel, I do have a few housekeeping items. So first of all, we are using the Zoom webinar platform. Everybody in the audience is muted automatically in the system. I do want to mention that we are recording the session, and for everybody who has registered, We will share the link, and we will also post a link to the recording on the Global Learning Collective website after the fact. And we do really want to make this an interactive session, so there's a couple ways we hope to do that. First of all, you should see the Q&A button in the Zoom platform, and we encourage you to ask your questions throughout the conversation. If panelists have a moment where maybe they're taking a breath and they're able to look at your question, they're welcome to answer in the moment, but of course we will revisit questions after the panelists finish their talk as well. And then we do hope for the panelists to speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, which would leave another 20 minutes or so to open up the conversation. And we have so many great people in the room today. We want to give you all the opportunity to share your own unique perspectives. So the way we want to do that is through the raise your hand button. So when it comes time to open it up for further conversation, you can raise your hand and we will try to turn on your microphone so you can speak with the group. All right, and so we're going to jump into the panel portion. I do want to mention a little bit about the structure of our session. So as a group, we decided on 8 key areas of international education and study abroad that we wanted to discuss today. And so each panelist has decided on 2 of these topics that they're really going to focus the portion of their conversation on. So we'll go through these 8 key areas 2 at a time, which you'll see highlighted as we go. Thanks once again for everybody in the room. Thanks for our panelists for all your work and contribution to this session. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jenna, our first panelist, and she's going to speak about travel versus non-travel and risk and safety management. So take it away, Jenna.
Thanks. As you said, my name is Jenna. I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. I've been in the field since the early 90s and the lead on study abroad risk management at our university since about the early 2000s, I think. I've got, on any given day, between 6 and 8 people in the office, kind of ebbs and flows, and our office is comprehensive, so we do study abroad and exchange. We do international student services and immigration advising, English language support, run intensive English programs, inbound custom programs, and those kinds of things. But for today, I'll focus on what we do for the between 40 and 60 maybe programs per year that we run abroad, following different models. So relative to those first 2 topics that you see, the risk and safety management and the travel versus non-travel, I'm going to kind of condense those down into one so that one flows into the other. And when I do that, I'll share the standards that I've drafted to make go or no-go decisions, beginning with programs this fall semester. I'm only going to concentrate on the new elements of the decision-making process. So this falls into the broader context of our larger risk framework for study abroad, study away. And more specifically under our standard operating procedures for identifying and addressing study abroad, study away risk. So I'll be sharing thoughts on the travel versus non-travel within that context of the go, no-go decisions that we make. So in preparing for this presentation and also for fall semester, I've asked myself 6 questions. First, what reliable resources are available? Second, what risks do we need to consider? Third, how do we determine criteria that need to be met before running a program? Fourth, what strategies do we put into place to mitigate and communicate risks? And then fifth, how do we document our mitigation strategies to provide evidence for compliance? So this is a working draft for me. We're still in the process at this point of trying to work through what our risks and criteria will look like. But this is what I've got so far, and this is what I'd like to share with you. So I'll go back to the first question, reliable resources. So one thing we looked at here is that there are a lot of resources that are being considered by other team members on our emergency operations team and by administration. And we need to take those into consideration while we are planning for study abroad programs. So good conversations with other risk managers and administration on campus about what they feel we should be using in terms of resources. We've also been working closely with the infectious disease team at a local hospital that's provided really good information And we're looking at local, state, county, city health department resources in the state of Wisconsin, overseas advisory council, of course, especially when it comes to reverse tripwires that companies are using for return to work decisions, the academic working group within OSAC, OSHA standards, and other subject matter experts that we can find. And after the resources, considering the risks, what risks are we going to be looking at? And I'm not going to cover them all because it's a long list, but I just want to demonstrate how we're looking at specific risks and then tying criteria to those risks as we make our decisions. And the first risk that I looked at in our office is just decisions. We've been running for many years under one set of rules on who makes decisions to do what, but there are campus risk managers and administration on our campus that might have a different idea of who should be making those decisions. So we're looking at who the decision makers are to make sure everybody's involved. We're reconsidering the reliability of resources that we've used in the past, especially US government resources like CDC and Department of State. And we're also looking at public perception, whether or not the public is going to look at us as a responsible or an irresponsible campus for deciding to or not to run study abroad programs. We'll look at trends by city, region, other country, the locations where we're going to travel, the places and the spaces that we'll travel through, the local health systems and things like that. And we'll look at things like entry restrictions by destination. So when I look at the risks, and there's probably a good 20 more on my list, the third thing that I'm thinking about for each one of these risks is, what criteria am I going to use specifically to make a go, no-go decision? And how am I going to write these so that I can communicate them well enough to administration and other risk managers on my campus and at the UW system level to justify the decisions that I'm making? So I'll throw out a few examples here from our current draft. The first being trends by city, region, or country, those risks. So I don't have specific numbers yet, but a criteria might look like the number of locally transmitted cases over a particular number of days or fewer in a particular city or region. So I would be looking at those numbers and perhaps comparing those to numbers here locally in Wisconsin to see if those numbers look better, worse, or the same as what we're experiencing here. Or I might look at the number of imported cases over a particular number of days or fewer in a particular location. And I may look at sustained pattern of lowered infections and put numbers to that pattern to show a downward trend over a particular number of days. And I'll use that level of detail to justify, as I said, decisions in the context of all of the other criteria that we're going to be applying. When I look at food, I might look at food establishments that have public websites to confirm whether practices are consistent with CDC guidance for restaurants, for example. And when I look at our partners and our suppliers, I'll look at them with an eye towards ensuring that I have partners that are going to take on part of that risk management strategy for me. So are they able to look over hotel selections, transportation selections, food establishments, venues that we're selecting to help us determine whether or not those are safe spaces or safe venues for our students, and whether or not we'll be able to prove to all of our constituents here, including families of study abroad students, the safety, or at least the mitigated risk, the decrease in exposure that we're hoping to get out of some of these strategies. Fourth, what strategies to mitigate and communicate risk might we put into place? So we might include these strategies in our request for proposals so that we can share those strategies with our prospective partners and share in implementing those strategies. We might create a program contingency plan, add them to our emergency plans or into our contract language, include them in orientation to make sure that we're communicating risks to students and that We have buy-in perhaps through waivers. We may even cancel different elements of the program or redirect to new locations or venues, or we may need to make the conclusion that we need to cancel a particular program. The fifth question that we asked ourselves was, how do we document these mitigation strategies? So our current plan is to just simply save a snapshot of the resources that we're using to make the decisions on the day that those decisions were made, so that we can go back in time and say, look, at this particular time, the only information we had available to us was what's in this snapshot. All this other stuff that we know now came later. So we can protect ourselves from complaints or from questions about the decisions that we've made. And then finally, creating alternative opportunities for global experiences. So outside of the context of study abroad, if we can't run our programs, then in that case, we are going to start looking at enrolling in online courses that are offered by partners or entities outside of Wisconsin, online courses with a global focus, participating in virtual internship programs. But within the context of our programs, because not everyone is going to be able to participate, we'll start looking at how do we run a course abroad that could also include people enrolled but participating from back home. People in high-risk categories, people not comfortable flying or traveling, people whose families won't allow them to travel. But simultaneously use that curriculum as our backup option if our program is canceled at the last moment. So in other words, create a curriculum abroad that could be taught here on campus or virtually if needed, so that students, if they can't travel, can at least still earn the course credit. Right, and I am going to stop there because I am at my 10 minutes.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for your time today. First, I just want to give a hello. I've learned that to my mother, who I learned has registered for the webinar, which I think is just fantastic. So hello, Mom. My mother, Vicky, calling in or Zooming in from Milwaukee. So that's just, it's great. I'm excited for that. So I'm assistant provost for global education at Columbia College Chicago. I've been here about 2.5 years. Now, previously, I was 17 years at the University of Chicago in a few different international education roles. And a little bit about my background, the office situation kind of fits into, I think, what we're seeing now in the field or are expecting or anticipating, or what many of you may be concerned about is changes within the office and loss of staff. So a year ago, I thought it was a year ago today, it was a year ago tomorrow. When I was traveling home from overseas, I learned that my office of global education office of 11 staff went from 11 to 1 in one day, and that was me. That was the one remaining staff member. And so there were several people, colleagues that lost their jobs. They were laid off. Some offices, colleagues, they retained their positions, but they've moved. So International Student Scholar Services moved to Student Affairs. There's still a dotted line. It's pretty thick. Off and on, in particular now since last Thursday, SEVP issued an update and guidance on fall programming, online programs. So I work closely with our Director of International Student Scholar Services, Claire, on digesting and interpreting those regulations, but I don't directly supervise them anymore. I wasn't directly involved or overseeing our international admissions and recruitment, but that team moved to international or enrollment management. But I still connect with our associate director, who's leading up our international admissions and recruitment effort, Sky, just to touch base, because I do work with our exchange students coming in, but also just to learn from her and what's going on, and just to bounce ideas, off of her and just to see what's going on. So my office has really changed, and the 2 study abroad colleagues were laid off. And so everything fell to me. So I bring all of that up to kind of preface more on the second point here that I'm going to talk about is resources and budgeting, and how that really will impact students, and how what I've seen impacting students from my perspective at Columbia College Chicago. So, when we were talking about this and framing it with the institutional oversight, I was really looking at one of the things that we've had to deal with, and we're still grappling with, I don't have the answers for, not only with students that were abroad that we had to work with to bring home, but planning for this fall and beyond, is what type of oversight do we have as an institution with adult students that are saying, I'm going abroad. Doesn't matter what you say, I'm going abroad, or I'm not coming home. We had a few students that declined our offers, as I'm sure many of you had, and then having to deal with that. Many students were like, okay, I'll come home. We have a small program. We were able to, we offered them time to think about the offer, and that we would coordinate and pay for their flights home. Some declined those offers. But what do we do as an institution in terms of, limiting credits or financial aid for programs that are approved? Do, those that are exchange programs, and the student still wants to go, the partner is saying, yeah, they can still come in, or they're going to go with an approved provider or organization that we work with. And the student's saying no, but the institution is saying we are not allowing international travel right now. So we have this challenge, right? And then those that are doing independent study abroad or programming, education abroad, for whatever that may be, and look like. And so we're really kind of grappling with that. What do we have for, we have to, as educators, we have to think about our institutions, right, and that liability, and operate with that in mind, certainly. But it's really the students. We are doing this for the best, in the best interest of our students, health and safety wise. And if it's a country, quite frankly, it might be safer right now to go to Italy than it is to come to Chicago, for a variety of reasons beyond COVID-19. But thinking in those terms, like, this is something that we're just grappling with at my institution, and there are no clear answers to that. And something that I'm trying to flesh out more with our general counsel, our faculty, and our provost office. The second point kind of falls into, again, what I'm dealing with. It's been this year where it feels like it could very well be what my colleagues are feeling right now. So there was a huge cut, obviously, as I talked about with staff, where 5 people were laid off. I'm a one-person office running study abroad, where 2 professional staff, we had 3 student workers, we had fortunate to have an intern, a graduate student from another institution that was working, I think it was up to 15, 20 hours a week for us, and we had an administrative staff. And I even helped out with I supervised and oversaw that area, and it has all been handed to me. And then we had budget reductions. So not only did I lose staff, but the budget that I had to be able to do things like make, I was able to travel a little bit and visit some of our partner schools. But it really limits my ability to do future planning for exchange partners, with other institutions abroad, right? I have this duty to go and check out the institution. We can have meetings, phone calls, and Zooms, of course, but it's really important to go and see the facilities where our students are going to be studying. It's important for me to walk around the area during the day and at night to see if it's safe, right? All of these health and safety measures, I can't do that right now. I'm not going to be able to travel. I anticipate further budget cuts. And so I'm working with all those. And to be honest, my ability, because of the reduction in resources, human resources and financial resources, I am not able to, I fully admit, to operate as I should or how I want to, what I'm accustomed to. My response rate to emails, I'm overwhelmed some days. Some days I can catch up, but I am overwhelmed. And while that has an impact on me, and it's incredibly stressful, over the summer I lost 14 pounds and I wasn't exercising and I wasn't eating better. In fact, I was eating worse. That says something. But ultimately, the people that are impacted are our students. I'm not able to serve them how I want to. And that is really the concerning part when you take such a drastic, and we're seeing this, across, our field. There have been stories that we've read about and heard about with reduction of staff. They make sense. I understand why those are happening, but it does make it harder to serve the students that we want to send abroad and to have these wonderful experiences. And so, it's really trying to take measure of that and trying to do the best that we can with the limited resources that we have, because we are going to have to make some cuts, no doubt. All of you are either part of that planning or it's going to be happening within your offices. So that's just kind of my story on how the impact of, fiscal, it was a year prior to COVID, but what we're seeing now and how that I see that impacting our field and in particular the students we serve. So I'll turn it on over.
Okay, first, can I just ask my fellow presenters to nod if you can hear me, so I know. Okay, I originally started this back at my house, and I live on a little farm, and it's chicken-powered internet, and it wasn't working, so I had to rush to the office. So excuse the sound check. So so I'm Stacy McCabe-Nander, and I'm the founder and president of Athena Study Abroad. I have actually an interesting background in the field. I originally worked on the university side of things. So I originally worked at both the Ohio State University and also was the director at Ohio Dominican University in Columbus, Ohio, of the international office. Then in 2005, 15 years ago, founded Athena and have been on the provider side since. So for me, I have a really interesting perspective on both the provider and the university side, just having seen both struggles. I'm speaking a bit today about student engagement and also academic requirements. So, I mean, in looking at student interest and engagement, I know that's a lot of what people are thinking about. How do I anticipate student interest and engagement? Are they going to care? Well, there's kind of these, it's simplified for sure, but there's two populations basically that I'm generally looking at from the provider side and frankly the university side too, which would be student prospects with tepid interest, kind of like they could go, they could not go. They're kind of making up probably 70 to 80% of the kids coming to the fairs and signing up. And then more like what I call the study abroad warriors, the kids that they're going no matter what, they're committed, they're going to make it happen. And, in terms of the tepid or kind of mildly interested students, I mean, time's obviously going to tell, but, the best projections right now say that participation in the standard travel study abroad programs very likely could decrease significantly among that population. At least maybe for several terms post-COVID. That's not to say that it will remain that way, but what some of the research and discussions we've had indicate is that obviously risk factors like unpredictable variables such as, quarantines. Will I have to quarantine if I go abroad? Travel? Will I get my money back if something's canceled? Obviously logistics, parental concerns, and those compound what some of those students already see as perceived but not always accurate barriers. See things like, cost or FOMO, as the kids say, fear of missing out. So a lot of the things where people, they might be ones that already are sort of allowing some of the obstacles make them not sure to go, and then something like this, we might see a decrease with them for a significant time. However, the study abroad warriors actually give a much brighter prospect. Best guess is for them in terms of, and we're just now talking about standard travel study abroad, but many people are actually expecting a spike among them, at least temporarily in those post sort of quarantine terms. The main reason for that among several has to do with the fact that they have this finite window in which they can take advantage of this collegiate opportunity. So for them, while we as offices or providers or organizations might be saying, well, we'll recoup in 2 years and we'll kind of get our footing. If you're a sophomore in college, you don't have 2 years. So for them, we might see them go ahead and take a risk where other students who have more time or are not convinced on going might go later or bypass the option. So those kids that are committed, we think that there very well could be a spike in those post terms. Now, both of those considerations, the drop in maybe the semi-committed kids and the pop or increase in the warriors, will that last? And that by far is the most challenging question. I would say for both organizations and institutions that experience surges in interest during these post-closure terms, it could be tempting to expand and invest resources to address that increase. So wow, we've got all these students, let's add more staff, let's increase things. But, and on the flip side, maybe the organizations or institutions that are seeing a drop, it might be, well, maybe I should get rid of the staff or break things down in order to weather the drought. But then again, will things rebound, And so, and again, this is a very fluid situation. All of this is assuming there's not a vaccine. Obviously, if a vaccine came in, not only would there be practical abilities for the travel to be much easier, but there also would be psychological barriers that would be eliminated for students, parents, administrators, and even ourselves. So assuming not vaccine, this is more kind of where this conversation is couching. The recommendation really is, and many of you know this, the best path is kind of the cautious approach, I think, trying to keep things as stable as possible. So, how can could I cut hours of my team, but not flat out eliminate team members? Could I ask for permission for extra hours, additional time? Could I collaborate with people around campus to help me deal with the expansion? And then have that contract back if my enrollment increased or decreased. So the worst thing would be dropping a valuable, weathered, trained team in a situation like David's, for example. That was certainly not his choice, but in that situation, it's really hard to build that back up. And so, the idea is not to react too quickly if we have the option not to do that. Now, of course, this is not even to touch on virtual opportunities, which Brad will be talking about later, and are really the hope is that those will enhance and expand the population of people wanting to do study abroad, not necessarily replacing the travelers, because the travelers, they've got to go, they've got to smell, they've got to taste, they've got to hear. And so this is not, for now, this is a good replacement for them to kind of bridge that gap. But the idea being that virtual will actually enhance and possibly expand the population of students that really take advantage of global. Now, in looking at academic requirements and outcomes a bit, one thing that I think is really important, particularly at the university level, is trying to, and if I was still at the university, one of my main focuses would be maintaining existing approved global initiatives, particularly when it comes to curriculum integration models, approvals in departments. Looking at required study abroad, for example, with language departments or business, or maybe it's part of an honors program, it's built into faculty-led components. Based on perceived risk, will these be maintained, reduced, eliminated? I think that it's going to be a pretty comparable reaction to the individual student. So when you have individual departments that are very committed, they'd be in the study abroad warrior category. I think we may see more from them, to make up for the lost terms that they didn't have. On the other hand, you've got departments that are not committed, that kind of could take it or leave it. We may see them drop off for a while. And so, one thing really I think that's important is if you have approvals with departments, I would do everything I can to keep those in place, because, we know that getting those resources, those approvals, those initiatives in place took so much human and financial power and commitment and workload, sweat equity, that it'd be really sad to see those fall off. So obviously, being ready to address those differences and get resources in line to offset concerns and keep initiatives on track. So kind of bridging those gaps, talking to those departments where study abroad is already really important. Finding new opportunities for integrating global initiatives and curriculum integration, particularly those that expand curriculum without travel. That's another thing we'll be looking at. Looking at virtual case studies, cross-collaboration among departments. So the question becomes, will virtual and distance programming that hopefully will grow and complement standard study abroad, will that create more opportunities for global programming with less barrier to entry? So maybe students in departments that weren't maybe as supportive of travel study abroad, maybe they will jump in on the virtual option. And so looking at actually enhancing and growing the global part of the entire academic experience. The best case scenario here is that virtual opportunities complement and expand programming on an even larger global academic experience instead of replacing in country. Takeaways, finding solutions to serve both populations of students and academic departments. So looking at the semi-committed versus very committed. Those are unique populations, and they likely will not be well served with just one solution, just standard study abroad or just virtual. So looking at how to serve both of them going forward in this kind of new normal. Doing everything you can to maintain existing approvals and curriculum integration where you can, as those are daunting to gain and surely require a great deal of human and financial resources to achieve in the first place. So breaking them down and building them back up is going to be very tough. The tendency could be to immediately work to create new opportunities, but you may be best served to begin with collaboration to maintain existing approvals for your office and, most importantly, the future students, which may require innovative and creative thinking, and then expand into new areas. So you've got a component already built in with the honors program, but for the next couple terms, maybe your school says they can't travel. Instead of looking at, starting with them, what can we do to create a virtual bridge that allows us to get back to that in-person bridge? Possibly this virtual bridge could exist as a secondary option for the honors program. So looking at kind of what can bridge you with the people that already have bought in, on board, infrastructures in place, and then going from there. And again, I would say currently, and I think we're all seeing that in both personal and professional environments, simplify is really becoming a key point. It's a great time to analyze the systems and processes you use to see if all of them are necessary. It may be reducing the amount of partners you work with, maybe reducing the amount of, making more approved lists or more detailed assessments where you've really vetted things. That may also mean with collaborating with even more partners than you work with. But the idea being that doing as much as you can to simplify your office, help maintain the infrastructure you have in place, that will help sustain you in looking at really the future without sort of having to react every time a change happens, because I don't think we've seen the end of the change, but that's not a bad thing. I mean, there's opportunity with every change. And so this gives us a really great opportunity to rebuild, rethink, and really sort of simplify. What are the core goals of what I'm trying to achieve here? So the recommendation is don't be afraid to ask people on campus, partner organizations you work with, colleagues, people are very open right now to creative collaboration and looking at maintaining and sustaining global initiatives at every level to weather the storm, as well as after the post-COVID vaccine. So I will kick it over to Brad, and he can take it from here, talking about diversity and virtual.
Thanks so much. Again, those of you know me, Brad Fueling, Chairman, CEO of the Asia Institute. It's great that you all joined us. Thank you again for taking the time. I'm just going to put a quick plug because I'm going to keep it short. I think our other presenters have given a lot of food for thought, and we certainly welcome your questions or comments. So please add any questions you have to Q&A or raise your hand on the comments side. We would like to make this a very interactive dialogue. So I'm just going to add, again, keep it really short, add a few thoughts to kind of flesh out the discussion here, specifically first on the diversity, equity, inclusion side. Some of you might know we at the Asia Institute really have been taking a focus in this area for the last 2, maybe 3 years, specifically trying to work with institutions that I would say have higher populations of non-traditional study abroad students, and trying to identify programmatic ways, content, curriculum integration ways, unique opportunities, I think, for these campuses to bring international programming to their students. And as I said, to a population that traditionally maybe doesn't study abroad. Unfortunately, right now, what I'm seeing is probably going to be a bit on the doom and gloom side. But these are things really observationally we're watching for. A lot of what we're spending our time now doing, and have been, I would say, for a number of weeks and months, but it's talking with a lot of you all, people, partners, etc., trying to understand various viewpoints. These webinars have been a great resource for that as well. And on the diversity, equity, inclusion side, where we stand today and are really watching for our decision-making on the fall. Our campus is going to be open. Our campus is going to be closed and move to or maintain online classes. And obviously for us, what we believe is fall and winter kind of grouped, and the decisions that are made for the fall and winter are going to significantly impact the spring. and possibly even summer. So, you know, what we're very concerned on, I guess, from a hypothesis standpoint, and now kind of researching, analyzing, and watching is, are there clusters of schools in certain locations, urban settings, for example, serving certain types of populations of students, commuting students, for example? Are certain types of schools, institutions, are certain types of schools in certain geographies making the decision to keep students off campus in the fall? Because as we see it, like I said, that is going to significantly impact the ability to talk with students about global opportunities, have information sessions. Sure, it will be virtual, but we all know that the on-campus, face-to-face meeting with a student, advising, et cetera, is a critical component for a lot of students to assure them that they're going to be well taken care of and that this is a great fundamental opportunity for them. So that's really what we're watching and observing. Some of you know that we've done some surveying, questionnaire, and we continue to plan to do that. And a part of this is kind of watching the trend in terms of what schools are deciding. I talked about campus closures, but obviously included is study abroad opportunities for students. And all with a viewpoint of what type of student makeup do those campuses have, and are we disproportionately affecting certain types of students, in this case, non-traditional study abroad students that, like I said, now may be even harder for them to study abroad because of the decision making. So that's one thing. Number two is the cost of study abroad. It's obviously a huge consideration. We hear it regularly, obviously, in our conversations, and we're very cognizant that ultimately students are paying for these opportunities. So maintaining low cost structure is important. Again, as we talk with various partners, especially in different geographies around the world, increasingly what I'm now hearing is, you know, the real high probability of cost increases. On the ground cost exposure increasing. If we're looking at dorm space, if we're looking at logistics like hotel accommodations, you know, are these hotel facilities, are dormitories on certain international campuses going to have policies in place that limit the capacity, whereby increasing the per room, per bed cost? That's certainly one thing. International travel. For us, predominantly in faculty-led short-term programs, international airfare is a huge component of the overall program cost. Are airlines similarly going to have capacity limitations? We already know and are hearing that they're going to cut down on the number of flights. So does this ultimately lead to higher costs for students? From the Asia Institute's perspective, obviously we're very cognizant of this. We are working very hard on our vendor side to maintain low cost structures. But generally what things point to right now is that the cost of study abroad will increase next year. And again, how does this in fact affect the diversity inclusion of programs? Are we reaching students? Are we able to provide, I should say, global opportunities to students where income is a factor? So again, maybe more questions than answers here, but these are certainly some of the things we're looking at in this dialogue. The last conversation, and then we'll turn it over for Q&A, is virtual experiences. And again, we've been taking a very, I would say, research, analytical, and kind of observational approach to this component. Simply for a few main factors, which I'll share. First, as I say, one of the realizations in looking at virtual for us is the reality that actually students are already learning online. If you ask me directly, I think maybe academic learning is lagging. But if you think about yourself and how much time you spend on a phone, mobile phone usually, or a tablet, iPad, you know, we're absorbing content. We can talk a lot about what type of content, but the reality is students are already virtual learners. They're already on their phones, accessing information, doing research, so to speak. It may be not the academic approach to research, but there is a component of learning that's taking place. And so what we're really looking at in the virtual space is how to approach students from the perspective that they're already utilizing to access content, to access learning online. That's certainly one thing, because obviously I think we can all understand and appreciate if we deviate too far from that perspective, students simply are not going to play along. They're not going to automatically jump on the bus when it's not an approach that they're really on board with. So again, going back to the theme of this webinar, we really are taking a student-centric approach in terms of the kind of content and access virtually that we would offer to students. The second piece is a bit of what Stacy actually alluded to. And this is, I think in the short term, what we've observed is that a lot of virtual experiences that have been created are simply a translation of the physical experience to virtual, similar to what's happened with classroom learning. But we just don't see that long term that this is going to be attractive to certain types of students. And again, Stacy mentioned, but you've got students that quite honestly right now, they are going to do virtual global programming simply because getting on an airplane and going to another country is impossible. But once that opportunity exists again, where they can buy a ticket, they have a passport, they're going to be on board to go because they really want the physical on the ground experience. That's what they signed up for. But what becomes exciting is this additional group of students. And the way I heard it best said is to think about your study abroad fairs and how many dozens of students are coming to study abroad fairs on campuses, going to booths, talking to various providers, third parties, faculty, overseas university partners, et cetera, and getting information, because quite honestly, they're very interesting global. But at the end of the day, they're actually not going to purchase an airplane ticket. They don't want to get on an airplane, but they're interested in global. And what we see in this area is a new group of students that virtual could be very appealing to. So we are looking very much at that area, offering students who, like I said, are not excited about the travel component, but certainly want the global experience to add to their academic career. So thank you again for the time, appreciate it, and we look forward to your questions.
All right, so my sincere thanks to all the panelists for all the information and perspective that you shared. I think it was a great conversation, and we do have a few questions coming from the audience. While I ask the first question, I actually do want to share a poll with the audience. As we've just finished talking a little bit about virtual, we would love to get some feedback from the many of you in the room about how you're approaching virtual, if you're considering it as an opportunity on your campus, if you're looking at it for a short-term solution, or perhaps implementing it into your regular programming moving forward. So I'm going to launch this poll, and then I'm going to launch into the questions. I'll give you just a minute or two to answer this poll. And so I'll turn over to the questions, and I want to pose this first question. I'll start with Jenna, and then David, perhaps if you have additional comments you can offer too. So the question is, do you anticipate campuses directing students to domestic study away programs perhaps as a safer option than overseas travel?
At UW Oshkosh, we do run domestic programs out of our office, and we have for quite a number of years. They're not as popular as the study abroad programs. And until this year, we were also members of the National Student Exchange. But due to cost in that particular exchange, we have just terminated our participation. So we've also considered the same question, thinking it might be easier to promote study in the US, but quite honestly, there are a lot of places in the US that it would be harder to convince administration to send students to right now than some places internationally. So I think that the answer to that question is really going to lie in the data that's available and the confidence that people have in the particular city, particular region, whether it's in the States or outside of the States, how much confidence the parents and the students have, and the administration at the institution in supporting those decisions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So at Columbia College Chicago, we are an art school, just broadly speaking. And so we have semester in LA program at Raleigh Studios out in Los Angeles. It's the oldest studio lot in Hollywood. It's across the street from Paramount Pictures. So we have that option. We send students there for a semester, with our semester in LA program, but we also have some faculty-led programs that during our J term in summer that can or that will capitalize on being out there for a week or two on that short-term type of programming. But we also have a lot of domestic faculty-led programs. We're kind of in that process right now where faculty and the dean's offices are finalizing this next academic year's faculty-led program. So it'll be interesting to see how what faculty come up with. I mean, we send students, we go to New York, we have faculty-led programs in Miami, we have them in, of course, in LA. I think those were the ones last year. So those are coming in now. So, but again, is it safer, speaking strictly on COVID-19, right? So what is safe now? How do we define where is it safer to go, whether it's domestically or internationally? But we do have those options. The associate dean who runs our semester in LA program sent an email a couple weeks ago on that we're going to, be flushing that out a little bit more. Maybe there are some opportunities to do additional programming if we can't go abroad, which would be exciting, no doubt. My office is involved with the domestic faculty-leds somewhat, not directly involved. So that's something that we're looking at for sure.
All right, great. So we ended the poll and it looks like 72% of you all out there are looking at virtual experiences, and there are a lot of questions coming through. I know we're getting close to an hour here, but I want to ask a few more questions of the panelists. Many are coming through about virtual. So a couple that I want to ask to the panel. One is, how are your institutions and organizations addressing concerns that virtual experiences will not provide meaningful engagement with cultural differences? So is any of our panelists interested in taking the answer to that? Brad?
Yeah, I see obviously a couple questions here on virtual, so clearly there's an interest and I can provide some perspectives. The way we're looking at virtual, to add another nice anecdote that I've heard, is somewhat to the perspective of what we'll call a traditional study abroad semester, annual year-long semester abroad, versus faculty-led, right? There's a huge debate, and again, we can go back and forth on that. Virtual is going to probably be more likely than not a similar dialogue. And so, the way we've looked at semester, full year, traditional study abroad versus faculty-led is by actually defining it, I think, better. They're certainly not replaceable, right? I mean, faculty-led is not a replacement for on the ground. And so the way we've looked at it is, for example, just to use simple terminology, semester, year-long traditional study abroad is more immersive, and faculty-led short-term is more about building awareness. And so similarly, we're looking at the virtual space in a light to be honest, not kid ourselves that this is a replacement to physical experiences, but how to incorporate some of the learning experiences, some of what students get, whether it's immersion, maybe more likely than not awareness building, into those virtual pieces. So I see some questions that I'll also touch on a bit here. In terms of specific types of programs that can be offered beyond virtual internships, what might students be interested in? Some of the things, again, this is all kind of developing, but some of the things that we've seen are what we're calling supplemental academic content. So these are additional learning opportunities that provide global perspectives to students who can do these virtually, but are taking some course already on campus, and this is a complement. So, we're reaching out, for example, to our extensive corporate partner network and regional network in Asia to identify speakers, presenters, panelists, for example, people who want to do video and are willing to share their ideas, concepts, content to students who don't necessarily want to meet them in person, who can do it virtually. Another thing I'm going to share, which I just thought about, is something the Asia Institute's been doing for years now, 5, 6, actually probably longer, is the incorporation of overseas alumni. Okay, so, are we able to invite alumni from your campus? Are we able to create panels of alumni from your campus that can participate and engage with students virtually? We've been doing this for years now, identifying alumni from our partner schools and incorporating them in our programming. And clearly there's an interest there to continue that into the virtual space. So that's one thing, the supplemental academic content. Second thing is mini courses, and developing very targeted, specific courses to complement, again, what they're already learning on campus, but in very unique ways. And I'll give you an example. Some of you might be aware, we brought students into specifically a factory that designed and built the Beats pill. Some of you, I hope, know the Beats brand and the pill. They designed actually the modular speaker system. And we brought students in to see that actual experience. So we're looking at similar opportunities, again, virtually, where students can really get behind the scenes, I would say, to see things that they touch, feel, buy, purchase, that they're aware of here in the States, but see the kind of behind the scenes view that only either an on-the-ground physical experience or possibly some kind of virtual content can allow them to access. And so again, this creates differentiation into the classroom, not necessarily something that can be provided on campus already, but it's complementary very much from a learning standpoint. Cultural engagement, I'm just going to add, for this, we're looking at what we're calling, some of you are very familiar with COIA, we're calling exchange-based programming, but these are opportunities for students in the States to interact meaningfully over the course of a semester with their peer students abroad, so that there is more of a long-term approach to actually the learning, the project work, what they're engaging in doing, and obviously the cultural side as well, that we're not only supplementing the facilitation, but guiding the students as well, so that there is more cultural understanding and engagement beyond just for example, 1 or 2 hour kind of video, which is limited.
And Rebecca, I was hoping I could just pipe in. I'd seen a couple questions about, what the anticipated CDC limits and WHO restrictions might be lifted. And obviously, we all know that the predictability from the leaders we've seen is not totally predictable. We're not sure exactly how things will go, if they'll be lifted quickly, if they'll be there for a long time. But I did want to mention that, one model, and this goes back to kind of the idea of being really nimble yourselves too, and not just, sort of waiting to see what happens, but sort of trying to take charges. At Athena, for example, us and our partners have created some study abroad programs, and I think you all could do something similar too, where, for example, in looking at a semester-long program, you can actually begin the first 4 weeks we're considering are going to be at a distance, and then the rest will be on the ground. So students would actually travel mid-term. That way, for the rest of the term, they could be on the ground. We have a model that if, for example, restrictions are not lifted, then the second trimester or part of the term, the second month, would then be from a distance, and they could still travel for the third month. And then assuming that restrictions are not lifted at all, then they could do virtual throughout the term. But it allows the university, the office, the organization to make opportunities for students that allow for that kind of moving target. But also, if it never lifts, they still do get to do the opportunity. And basically, us and our partners on the ground have to be nimble in figuring out, okay, we need to take this, what we had planned to be an on-the-ground in-person experience and turn that virtual. So we kind of have the model laid out so that, you know, they can be there for the whole term, or the first month virtual, or the first and second month virtual, or all three virtual. And those options are allowing us to give students more opportunities, and not have to kind of wait around for sort of unpredictable restrictions and you know, these sort of calls that we're not able to anticipate. Another question that had come up, which ties in with that too, is, well, how do we make scholarships for virtual? You know, we're having a hard time making it so that students can have the financial support for these opportunities. But what we're doing with a lot of institutions is actually building in these opportunities virtually, and these sort of hybrid models. We're building them in so that it counts for financial aid. You know, it's actually part of the curriculum. So either a placeholder class would exist at the, you know, the university that the kids would be doing, or it would be some sort of special course that they'd be signed up for that would be an equivalent back on the home institution's curriculum. But the idea being that they would still be able to use their financial aid and or scholarships that were available to them, as it was considered part of the curriculum. So those are opportunities where we're sort of treating virtual as if they're abroad. Well, how is that normally processed? And work with the universities to kind of, again, nimble is the key. I mean, figuring out, that's where the more people you can sort of, you know, round the wagons together and kind of figure out how do we make this work and sort of come up with exceptions in a very exceptionary situation, really helps to allow the mobility to continue as we all wait for the next information.
So there's another question here related to virtual that I like to pose, and perhaps Jenna or David, if either of you could weigh in. Have either of you had to overcome the concern of virtual programs taking tuition dollars away from the home campus, especially now in light of economic constraints?
Anna?
David, if you've got specific examples, I'll defer to you.
You know, I don't, and partly because I'm not anti virtual. It's just that my situation doesn't allow me to, you know, even kind of, I don't have that bandwidth to really kind of focus on that. I'm still working with the students that we had to bring back from abroad, and how are they doing, finishing up their coursework, planning for, you know, your kind of the traditional study abroad. I've been thinking about this, but nothing, we're not, if a student were to come up and say, we want to do this, I'd be talking with them through to learn more about, you know, the credits and making sure that we would be able to, and with our Office of the Registrar, that they're going to get credit for this. But I haven't had that at this point. You know, one of the things when you work with providers, right, that's something that I would like to do more, but that also is then not keeping the tuition dollars in the school, right? So we have these kinds of conversations. I think it's very similar to that conversation. My focus is really what is best for the students, and if that is going to be a virtual experience, then let's move forward with that. But you know, and what I love about Columbia College, and what was one of the things that was appealing when I was applying. I did my research. I didn't take leaving the University of Chicago after 17 years lightly. And so I did my research, and it was really student focused. Our students are wonderful. They're creative, and there's this support for the students. Yes, there's that fiscal concern, but I haven't heard that yet. Now that it's, you know, it's been a year since the changes in my office. Once things kind of settle with COVID, I hope to have more time to really kind of plan out what does, with colleagues, what does global education look like? So it is, you know, the education abroad, the study abroad, or an internship abroad, or a virtual exchange, or we're in the city of Chicago, right? So we're fortunate in that I have almost every country has a consulate here, or many do, right? How can we engage and work with them? We have all kinds of the neighborhoods where I could, you know, how could we supplement a virtual with a virtual exchange or experience with going to Chinatown or Greek town or Koreatown. So these are the things. I'm not at that point where I've had to have that kind of, hasn't presented itself yet. Most of how I've been operating is, I don't know what I don't know. I've been there in this role now, running it for a year, there's still things I don't know. So it's always, oh, well, now this came up. Now I have to focus and learn about that and problem solve that. But for me, I haven't had to have that kind of deep thought on my own and bringing it to a wider group yet on that loss of tuition dollars.
For me, because I'm trying really hard right now not to overstress my staff. They've just spent, the last 3 months deconstructing everything that they spent the 12 months prior building, while trying to build out for 2021. So for me to add virtual and try to recruit students one by one into a new program at a time when it's difficult to advertise, I don't think would work for us. So my current idea is to actually take programs that do travel and ask the professors who are leading them to partner back with professors at home, either one professor, one class, or multiple professors for one day at a time, but somehow integrate the students' experience abroad into the classroom here back at home. Possibly expand that to group projects or blogs on specific topics that might take into consideration the new worldview that some of our students are getting and the impact that might be having on the students back home. So I think that that's a reasonable reach for me right now, is to go out to these professors who I already have a good relationship with and ask them what they could do to bring their programs back to the students who are here on campus. That wouldn't have a tuition impact because the students here on campus would already be regular tuition fee paying students in a regular class. It's just that class would be modified somewhat to include more virtual or global learning.
Yeah, we had a faculty-led program that was supposed to go to Prague, a marketing program to Prague, that obviously this summer it was canceled. And so we've turned it into a campus-based, right, or a virtual that's still going to be taught by the faculty, but still engaging with their colleagues and their connections in Prague. So we were able to still with the faculty. I mean, I'm not taking credit. I had quite honestly nothing to do with it. And so they were able to really be proactive and keep that course running and keeping that international kind of component and focus, even though everyone is wherever they find themselves via Zoom now for this course that's going to be running soon.
All right, thanks to you both. I want to wrap up with one last question. I apologize that we're going a little bit over an hour here, but this is something that we actually talked about as we were preparing for this session, and I hope I can throw it over to Stacy, because I think she's the one that really brought up this issue. So the question is, if a university bars travel and a student is adamant about studying abroad and chooses to independently stay or go on another program, what is your protocol if there's one at all? So how do you deal with students who choose to stay abroad? And Stacey, I think you dealt with this issue at Athena, right?
Yes, I did. And so, from our perspective, I mean, we obviously try to respect all of our university partners. So if they say, we're shutting things down, we need students to come home, we do everything we can to facilitate that, make sure that happens. But these are adults, and we are in a position where, we've had students say, I'm not coming home. I'm on a Greek island. There's no COVID on any of the Greek islands, and I live in New York City. I'm not coming home. And so, we've been in situations where we've had to kind of say, that's reasonable. And so we work with their school and really, sort of work through with them, the risks and the conversation of, while there's an overarching policy that yes, coming home and being here, with your family is probably the best, particularly for restrictions. I think what David mentioned was a really, great point that, being in Chicago versus, being in Sorrento or, a small location where, a lot of our programs are, we had a lot of students that struggled with that. And so, I will say that becomes a debate. And we did have partners that said, we need you to not, even in the future terms, we need you to not allow them to go. And, so we want to support our partners, but we also have students that say, I'm an adult and I'm going anyway, regardless of if I get credit, get financial aid. So our policy at Athena has always been that, these are adults and they are able to make choices. And so, in as much as it's a safe move for them to do. And we're very, very cautious about, the CDC warnings and travel quarantines and everything. But at the end of the day, if they're fully informed and their university is on board with working with us, we do permit them to go, assuming that everything on the ground is safe. And again, there's a lot of vigilance that goes into whether that's permitted or not. But we do have that happen. And we have students that say, I'm doing this, and we have a very hard time telling them no when they are independent adults. And so it's something that I know a lot of institutions and organizations and providers and students are dealing with these topics. And so it's a really weighty question. So I would definitely say collaboration is key. Working between universities, partners, and the student to kind of make sure everybody's informed, everybody's aware of the risks of the on-the-ground realities, because sometimes the media can do a number on the truth, and then really sort of, operate in what's the safest and most, effective and also fair way to the student as well as the university and partners.
All right, thanks, Stacey. And thanks again to all the panelists, and sincerely appreciate everyone in the audience today. I think we could have this conversation for the rest of the evening and not run out of things to say and discuss. So I wish we had more time to get to more questions and to allow more of you to speak, but we will, and we hope to follow up with more webinar sessions from the Global Learning Collective in the near future. We're talking about different ways in which we can possibly support dialogue and discussion in more of an asynchronous format. So we're throwing around ideas that we can use to hopefully support and stir more conversation and dialogue in the near future. But for now, we'll say thank you. We'll sign off. We're going to share the recording after the fact. But once again, we're just so appreciative that everybody is here today. We hope you stay safe and take care, and we hope to see you all in person sometime in the near future. So thanks again, and have a great evening.